Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the GAA Lean Body Podcast. I'm your host Brian Keane, strength and conditioning coach and sports nutritionist, here to help you with all things GAA related fitness. Today's podcast, I am going to talk about the 5 things I do now playing at age 35 compared to when I was 25. So as I kind of get heavy into what is my off season ahead of my preseason, there's a few things that have been coming in and has been coming in quite frequently from people who are listening to this podcast, who are following me on social media. So for those following on Instagram and TikTok in particular, between the comments and the DMs, it gives me nice little feedback on what way to take this podcast in terms of content to create. So a massive thank you. But something I'm getting asked quite a lot, particularly by the older players, but also some younger players who I didn't quite expect to ask this question, was the things that I'm doing now at age 35 compared to age 25. So for a lot of us, we know that most peak physical fitness for athletes in a sport like football, hurling, ladies football, camogie even, is around your mid-20s, mid to late 20s. It's normally when you're physically most developed and you also have enough playing experience that you're better with context or contextual situations in games, i.e. you know when to speed it up, you know when to slow it down, you know how to reset after games when you've played poorly, you know how to get your mindset right in the lead up to games, your preparation, etc. So you'll normally find that 25 to 30 is that peak window of time. However, if you look after yourself, you could potentially peak and go on even further and longer than that. So I'm going to talk about what I do now compared to what I did at 25. And I made a lot of mistakes. And there's things that I did well that I'll talk about that if you're doing, I would advise continue doing. And there's things that were massive mistakes, things that I really should have been prioritizing at 24, 25, 26, but I wasn't, even 27, where I am now, and I wish I had done a little bit sooner. So hopefully there'll be value in this, regardless of whether you're a young player or somebody trying to stretch out those last few years on the back end of your playing career. First thing is a recovery focus. Now this one's going to sound really obvious, but I have a much higher focus on recovery now than even my actual training. So one of the advantages of being older and just being on this planet for longer, particularly if you have a good routine with gym training, strength training, etc., is a lot of that becomes what I call your new normal. And you have a foundation or a base level of fitness and strength that doesn't go away unless you're basically hospitalized for 3 months and can't move. Meaning that I need to do very little strength work to maintain my strength. Partly down to being quite naturally strong, but also because I've been weightlifting since the age of 13, so 22 years lifting weights. And I have this base level of strength built up. Now, something I've talked about in the past is I still have to do maintenance runs even in the off season because I lose my fitness, my aerobic fitness so quickly. Like if I take 2 weeks off running and I try and go back and do a long run or even a 5K or sprints, it feels like I've never ran before in my life, but I can take 2 months off lifting weights and go in and bench 140. I'm naturally quite strong from that farmer genetics, but I lose it on the fitness side. So I have to do those maintenance runs during my off season and preseason just to stay on top of it. But recovery is something I'm putting a huge focus on now. And I didn't do enough of this in my 20s. And looking back, it's so obvious now that when you train so intensely, whether that's gym-based, pitch-based, game-based, or a combination of all three, which is the majority of players listening to this podcast, to not prioritize your recovery is quite silly. And part of the reason I didn't do it was I didn't enjoy it. And I'll talk about what I do now. I kind of habit stack my recovery so that I'm doing something else while I'm doing my physical recovery. And I've also found the modalities that have a better bang for your buck and spend and don't take as much time. So I'll talk and discuss all of those as we go through. But the recovery focus is something that I spend a lot of time on now. Partly because I have to, because if I'm trying to perform at a peak physical level, once you get tightness and rigidness, like I'm one of those players, and you're probably similar if you're a long-term listener to this podcast, fitness and strength and conditioning isn't a major issue. Obviously, it can always be better, but it's not a major concern because you're going to the gym, you're working out, you're moving. You're not one of those players who just sits on the couch in the off-season and doesn't do anything and then gets 2 stone overweight and then has to run it all off in January and February when they go back to preseason. There's a good chance if you're listening to this podcast, you don't fall into that bracket. But something that I do and have found that can negatively affect my performance is when I'm too tight or when I'm injured or when I'm strained. And a problem with a strain, as most of you will already know, is everything around that strain can tighten. So I've had a long-term adductor injury that I worked through. So when my adductor on my groin gets tight, everything around it gets tight. The glute, the hamstring, lower back, everything. And then that can impact performance. So I have a heavy recovery protocol at the minute. So I do a lot of interset stretching, where during my workouts I'll stretch interset. I also have a lot of dynamic movements in my workouts, particularly my S&C sessions that I'll get on to next, where there's a lot of dynamic movements in that session. So it's doubling over as a stretch, something like a lateral lunge, which is a strength movement, but it doubles over as a slight adductor stretch on the bottom part of that movement. But my active recovery looks like about an hour of foam rolling every day, which sounds like a lot, but I habit stack it. So one of the things, and this is a flaw in my own personality type, but one of the things that I struggle with is switching off in the evening. And I used to feel like watching TV, with the exception of live sports, was such a waste of time. And that thought isn't right, it isn't wrong, it isn't indifferent, it's just the way I always felt. I always felt like if I was sitting watching TV at 6 p.m, I was like, this is such a waste of my time, I should be doing something more proactive. Whereas when I habit stack it with rolling, and I use a vibration foam roller, it's the Pulse roll, but you can use any vibration foam roller, any good Thunder or Rumble roller. I will watch something, either Sky Sports News or a game or a TV show in the background, and I'll roll out while I'm doing it. So it's habit stacking. I'm getting some switch off time and escapism from the TV, but I'm also doubling over with something. So I'll do, depending on my tightest muscle groups, I have this in my GAA lean body program, the exact recovery protocol, but I recommend focusing on your high target areas that are tight. So glutes, hamstrings, quads. I use a muscle minder massage gun as well, which I love. 2 pieces of recovery kit that are my all-time personal favorites. I have no affiliation with either. I absolutely love my muscle minder massage gun and my vibration roller by Pulse Roll. But again, I don't think the brand matters. I think they're all more or less the same, but they're phenomenal. And if they broke in the morning, I'd buy another one. I also use a sliotar for trigger point tension on my hamstrings, and that works the majority of my lower and upper body when it comes to focusing on specific myofascial release in those areas. Also, I do and try and do a lot more ice. And I did a popular podcast several months ago on my favorite recovery methods that went through everything from ice and heat to supplements. And ice is something that I am such a huge fan of in terms of physical recovery. And this is something that a lot of players know, because some clubs, County are quite good with this. They'll have ice baths after training, and some players will take advantage of it, and it'll reduce that inflammation between sessions. And if your primary goal is recovery, then getting into an ice bath or getting into even a cold shower can help, or a cryotherapy bath or a cryo unit. All of these things can be really useful for your recovery. So now at age 35, I spend probably as much time in active recovery as I do physically training. And I'll continually do that. I've been doing that since my 30s, when I went into the world of ultra endurance races, just because to recover between workouts, which could take me multiple hours a day, I had to keep my body kind of at peak physical condition in terms of recovery. And then obviously don't neglect the 80% of your recovery, which is your nutrition and sleep, which is, again, has been a priority for me even in my 20s, but still even more so in my 30s. 80% of your recovery, like, you can have the best massage gun and the best foam roller and cryotherapy every day and all of this, and that will help. But if your sleep is rubbish and your nutrition is crap, none of it really matters, because they're just marginal gains anyway. They're the things that'll move you from an 8 to a 9 or a 9 to a 10, but they're not 0 to 8, such as sleep and recovery. So make that the base of your program in terms of recommendation from me as a professional. The next one then is the workouts. My workouts have completely changed, and this is part of the thing that got me the most excited about returning to GAA this year. Was I was getting really bored of my workouts. I was getting really sick of long runs and just doing a lot of single leg stuff, which doubles over quite well in GAA, but I was doing single leg stuff that helped with just repetitive strain injuries that would come with running long distances. And I was getting really sick of training. I was getting really bored of training. And I started to design a new program for myself. And I put up a lot of these workouts on TikTok, a lot of these workouts on Instagram. So you can follow me on there and you'll see a lot of them. And like, I'm a believer, and I have been for a long time. I will work with some players in my GAA Lean Body program, and I love that. But there's players who can't commit the time, can't afford it, or for whatever reason can't get into the program for depending on time of the year, etc. And I'm trying to put out enough content that you can keep doing stuff yourself, either for free by just following my content, taking the workouts and doing that. So hopefully I'll be able to continually do that as we go through. And I've been putting up a lot of those workouts. What you'll see is much more multi-dimensional movements, a lot more agility-based work, a lot of adductor stuff to make sure that glutes and adductors are firing and working correctly as I return next season. And that workout has completely changed. Now, I also merge it with a little bit of hypertrophy and strength, but it's worth adding here that what I'll do with players versus what I'm doing myself will be different, because if I'm working with someone who's 24, 25, they have a completely different physical spectrum to me at age 35, who's been training and lifting weights for 22 years. So I have a lot more multi-dynamic movements, a lot of body weight, a lot of single joint or multi-joint compound lifts built into my program, but not maxing out or going too heavy at any point, whereas I might have a player I'm working with in an off-season or a pre-season program doing that. So there's a difference and a variation there. But for me, my workouts have changed. When I played GAA last time and the 25, 26, 27, at that kind of peak physical fitness in terms of age bracket, 27 in particular, I had a lot of secondary goals, very similar to my GAA lean body program. I followed that program nearly identically, particularly the advanced version of that program in 2017, because that was my goal. My goal was to get fitter, it was to get faster, it was to get stronger, it was to build muscle, to get leaner. I wanted everything in the program, and that's what I designed the program for. Whereas now, fast forward several years later, 6-7 years later, I have less of a body composition goal, just because one, it means less to me in terms of order of priority. It's just something that will change potentially for some athletes as you get older. So I'm doing a lot more functional movements, but you can check out those on my Instagram, on my TikTok, and my social media in general. The next thing is food choices. I'm much more mindful of high inflammatory foods in my 30s than I was in my 20s. And something that I could get away with, that I can't get away with now at 25 versus 35, was I could eat quite inflammatory foods and not really see a negative response. So for example, and only older players are going to get this, so apologies if you're younger, you're like, what are you talking about? But it's something to be mindful of for the next few years. When I was 25, I could smash down a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream and go out and train the next day and have an amazing session. If I do that same thing now in 2022, 2023, my joints ache the next day. My knees, my ankles, my tendons and my elbows, everything just hurts, and it feels like somebody has just, if you're using oil to lubricate a joint, it feels like somebody has just gone in there and just grinded the two things together, and I just don't feel that good. And that's normally down to the inflammatory response to the food. There's obviously some gut microbiome issues going on there as well, as somebody with a history of gut issues. But I am more mindful of the inflammatory response of certain foods. Now, to demonize one food wouldn't be useful here, because everyone has such individual responses based on their gut microbiota, based on a whole host of factors, genetic and otherwise. But certain foods will cause an inflammatory response. And if you were finding that you wake up the next day and you were just stiff and sore and you haven't actually done anything new, there's no training that's been different, no extra game, no injury, and you just don't feel right, look at your food choices. Particularly for me, as I said, sugar is a high food that's quite red flag for me when it comes to performance, and I don't remove those foods. It's just that I can't smash a full tub of ice cream like I could in my 20s, whereas now I'll just have a bar or 2 bars and I'll be good. So that's something I'm looking at much more, that inflammatory response of foods in my diet, whereas I think I could get away with that. I had just so much more leniency or leeway with how I felt on certain foods compared to 10 years later. And I think even checking in now, something that I didn't do and I should have done sooner, was removing milk. And this is possibly why the ice cream had such a bad response for me as well. But milk is a food that I don't drink, I don't consume. And it's not that I'm anti-milk, I'm far from it. I think if it agrees with you, you've no lactose or dairy intolerance, it's totally fine, assuming you're not vegan and removing it for ethical reasons. But I don't respond well to it. My whole body stiffens up. And something that I really struggled with in my early 20s was shin splints. I used to get dreadful shin splints. And I did nothing in my program but staying on top of keeping my calves a bit looser, but stretching them and removing milk. And my shin splints went away. Now, this is completely anecdotal. And as someone who's a sports nutritionist, I hate using anecdotal evidence on a evidence-based podcast. But that food was having such a negative impact for me And it was the only thing that I changed. I removed all dairy. I switched to almond milk. I switched to coconut milk, and my shin splints went away. I didn't switch my football boots. I didn't have any special recovery protocol. I wasn't going for deep tissue, nothing. I just removed the milk, and that response went away. And I actually unintentionally did it. I was having sinus issues, and I removed the milk because my sinuses kept getting clogged. But once they cleared, my shin splints also went away with it. And again, I don't want to say causation equals correlation. Might not necessarily be the case. If you have shin splints, I'm not saying stop drinking milk, but it shows that there are responses that certain foods can have within your body that can be potentially causing an issue. Now, again, that's how long is a piece of string. Shin splints can be coming from a running gait imbalance. It can be coming from a muscular tightness somewhere. It can be coming from a whole host of factors. You want to kind of go through each one on the list and then tick off the box to make sure that it's not being caused by one of the other more obvious issues. But that is something that happened to me personally. The next one then is drinking less and less sugar and alcohol. I was never a massive drinker outside of college years, but from the age of 23, 24 on, I was never a big drinker. I'd go out occasionally and I'd have like a blowout and a night out, but that could be maybe 3-4 times a year. And now, even in my 30s, I'm a lot more of a casual drinker. I'll have a glass of wine, I'll have a pint of cider, I'll have a glass of brandy on a Saturday night, but I'm not a big binge drinker. But sugar, as I mentioned, is something I have to consume less and less of. And in my 20s, I went through the phase because I qualified and certified as a sports nutritionist when I was 24. And one of the downsides of having all the knowledge of sports nutrition without the context of having worked with hundreds and thousands of people over the years at this point, I just went by the book. I wasn't able to throw the book out when it wasn't applicable. And one thing that I found coming up time and time again to enhance sporting performance was drinking sugar or drinking sports drinks, Lucozade Sport, Powerade, etc. And I would consume those drinks before training, at halftime, after games. And that's something that just doesn't work for me now and hasn't worked for me in years. Since I switched to ultra endurance events in my 30s, I became a lot more fat adapted, meaning that my body burns fat for fuel, dietary fat that I eat, or fat on my body in terms of breaking down fat on my body. But I wasn't a carb-based athlete. I wasn't running marathons and ultra marathons on carbohydrates. I was running them off dietary fat, so almond butter, nut butters, things along those lines. And the sensitivity to sugar just doesn't seem to work for me anymore. And I did it in my 20s, and I actually went against how I felt. And this is going to sound so stupid, but if this is you, at least you know you're not alone. Just because I read something, and I did, and I was heavy into the sports nutrition literature when I qualified first in particular, still am, but very much so in the beginning. But I didn't know how to critically analyze any of it. So I would read it and go, okay, sports drink are good for athletes. Playing a glycolytic sport, amazing. I'll drink sports drinks. And I actually always felt a bit horrible on them. Like my gut, in terms of like, I just feel a bit sick, just feel a bit bloated, and I just didn't really feel that cognitively switched on. And I just kept drinking them during the season because I thought it was what I was supposed to do. And that is part of the problem of doing things yourself. Now, if I could go back, I would have worked with a coach. The downside of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was sports nutrition was relatively in its infancy in GAA, and there was nobody at the time that I could find that was serving what I wanted to do, which was build muscle, lose body fat, get fitter, get stronger, get faster. Literally what I specialize in with players, and serving the market of who I didn't have when I broke onto the scene first and was trying to get all and hit all these multiple goals. But that was something that didn't work for me. And when you're trying to figure it out yourself, the advice I would offer here for those listening, for you listening, is although I say something, or another sports nutritionist or a strength and conditioning coach says something, if you try it out and it doesn't work for you, then it's worth removing. If you've given yourself enough runway of time. So let's say in this example, you're going to do the same as me with sports drinks. You're going to say, right, every training session and every game, I'm going to drink Lucozade Sport for the next 3 weeks and see how it goes. If after 3 weeks, and you've given it enough runway of time, probably about 15 sessions, say 3 to 4 sessions, probably about 15, 20 sessions total, and you're like, actually, I feel worse on this, then cut it. Even if I or somebody else has said everybody should have Lucozade Sport during a game. If your body is not responding well to it, it means that that's not a good fit for you. And that's advice I wish I had, and context I wish I had even 10 years ago, that I apply now, and even with my athletes now. Whereas I can say, look, do X, Y, and Z. The beauty of working with a coach and working with a professional, if someone's like, actually, I feel sick on this, or I feel bloated on this, or I don't really feel good on this, I'm like, okay, we switch and we go to an alternative. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind as well. The final thing then is my supplements. At age 35, my supplements have completely, I won't say done a 180, because I'm still a big and a massive fan of supplementation, but I think supplements are, and I've been screaming from the rooftops on this for the past 10 years, supplements are a supplement to your nutritional plan, meaning that you can't out-supplement a bad diet, but they can enhance and greatly enhance the nutritional protocol that you are following. And I, in my 20s, had a heavy focus on aesthetics and performance to a degree, but more so aesthetics. I wanted to build muscle, I wanted to lose body fat, and I didn't really think of supplements outside of recovery and basic recovery, like a protein shake post-workout. I was looking at other supplements that would help me build muscle, lose body fat. Whereas at age 35, I now look at supplements for health, and I'm looking at supplements for energy. My health supplements now, and my staples are a probiotic. I use the Udo's Choice Super 8 Gold as a probiotic. I use Mag 365 as a magnesium source, and I use a fish oil, Nordic Naturals. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. These are just the ones that I use, an omega-3. And they're kind of my staple supplements, which are all kind of health-based. But something that, if I wish I'd known at age 25, I would have looked at the supplements that gave you the best bang for your buck. And a mistake I made 24 and 25, the year we won the All-Ireland with our club, and then the following year, I was experimenting and used to take pre-workouts occasionally before games. And now, with the knowledge and information I have now, is one of the stupidest things you can do. Now, it's not worse than nothing, meaning that the downside's not terrible, just the upside isn't great either. With this pre-workout, and pre-workouts are normally designed for the gym, so they normally have creatine in there, caffeine in there, beta-alanine in there, supplements that can potentially help you, but they're designed for workouts. They're designed for lifting weights. So when you're running around a pitch and sprinting, stopping, they're not, with the exception of the caffeine within that supplement, going to directly help you. And you're better to isolate the supplements that will have a positive impact on your performance, and then just take them before a game. And the ones that jump to mind straight away are going to be caffeine. The most scientifically, well, outside of creatine, the next most scientifically backed supplement of all time, the number one drug on the planet. It's legal, but it's an amazing drug that you take, and it can enhance your performance, your cognitive function, your physical ability to perform, your removes and reduces your perceived level of fatigue. It's just an absolute wonder drug and a wonder supplement, and you can take it in a pill, you can take it in a cup of coffee, you can take it in a can of Monster, but I would treat it as such. Save it. Don't use it for every workout. I had one of my guys in a program about 6 months ago who was addicted to caffeine and was literally on 6-7 cups every day, and that was just to get by. And you can't get the benefit of the drug when you're in over-reliance on it. So I would say scale it back. I personally don't take caffeine on rest days, and I personally don't take it on non-work days, because I try and use it for something like recording podcasts today, or for a workout, or before a game for intensity. So use your caffeine. The other supplement that comes to mind there that I think flies under the flag a little bit is beta-alanine, because some players hate the way that it makes you feel. So beta-alanine buffers lactic acid, so it can improve if you get that heaviness or that fatigue and that lactic acid build up in games, particularly towards the end. Beta-alanine can help to buffer that, so it can improve and increase that threshold before that lactic acid starts to become a problem. But it also comes with skin tingles, and some players hate that, particularly if you don't know what's causing it. I remember the first time I took it, it was in a supplement called Purple Rat, I think it was, Control Labs, that since probably been discontinued. But when I was 19, and I literally went and changed all my clothing and went and bought new clothes, because I thought it was a problem with the material I was training in, and then I thought it was the problem with the washing up liquid, because I was washing up my own clothes in college, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I didn't understand that it was the beta-alanine within that supplement that was giving me these skin tingles. I thought it was my clothes that were the problem. So some people would get in their body, some people would get flushed in their face, but that does level out and balance over time. But it's an absolutely wonderful supplement for someone who struggles, particularly if you're in a position where you're covering a lot of ground and fatigue and lactic acid can be a problem. That's a supplement I would definitely look into, and that is one that is a base of mine for the coming season. So there are 5 things that I do now, playing at age 35 compared to when I was 25. As I said, goals change and priorities change, but this is still a podcast that I wish I'd potentially listened to when I was in my 20s, because I could avoid a lot of those mistakes. I probably would have added in recovery elements sooner. I would have been specific with my workouts. I would have been experimenting with my food choices, and I would have been looking at my supplements and seeing other multiple goals that could potentially help. Probably the supplements is the one that I wouldn't change if I could go back. I think your supplements should always match to your goals. So if your goals are building muscle, losing body fat, your supplements will reflect that. If your goals are recovery performance, your supplements will reflect that, or a combination of all of those. So hopefully that helps. Anyways, that's everything from me from today's podcast. For more details on working with me directly in my GAA Lean Body program, I will pop the details for it in the description below. That's all from me for this week. Catch you all next week.